School of Nock week 5. I want to congratulate you first for making it through the first month of this process. And believe me, I know that last week was definitely the toughest week there was. The important part about that is you recognizing that the shoulder is such a critical aspect to your entire shot process and the whole structure and foundation of you as an archer. Now, looking through your social media posts, I recognize that many of you started to be able to identify several things on your own. One, when the shoulder was not correct. You also started to identify when shots were suddenly easy and when shots really started to struggle, and then you would be able to think about that shoulder positioning and realize, man, this front shoulder had crept into a position that was making this shot difficult. The other thing that's really important and which leads into this week is you starting to understand that your posture, that your front shoulder position will then really start to dictate your anchor position on your face or the overall fit of the bow. So some of you out there started to all of a sudden make little comments saying, I all of a sudden feel like my draw length is too short now. And that's because for the first time you were keeping that front arm straight, you're raising it up to the target and drawing the release hand back to the face while maintaining your good posture. And this is absolutely perfect archery form. Several of you have made such progress that I've even made comments, I'm going to be asking you for lessons soon. And believe me, I am honest when I say that. Now, the other thing some of you might have noticed is if you're using a silverback or a tension-based release, that for the first time you're able to go through that draw process, and as soon as you start to let off the safety, that release is firing. And so what that's telling you is you're finally starting to grow into your proud posture, and your alignment is so perfect right now that you're being super efficient in how you're holding that bow at full draw. And when you're letting off that safety, it's going off really quick. So some of you that are now identifying your front shoulder position, shooting proud, and also building the stamina that we've worked on over the past 4 weeks by shooting those 4 arrows per end. You're starting to now have the strength to where that release is feeling a little bit easier for you. So this week, we're going to focus on 2 different things, or I should say we're going to focus on one thing, but we're also going to make a slight modification to another. This week, I want you to back down your arrow number to 3 arrows per end. The reason I'm going to do this is because last week we put a lot of pressure on that front shoulder and on you stamina-wise by teaching you a new way to draw your bow, and also still going through those 40 arrows per end. So we're going to tailor that back a little bit for this week so that we can still maintain focusing on each of these steps and now adding the next step. Now, it's important that I reiterate one more time that you have to continue to focus on each one of these steps through your shot process. Yesterday, I looked at someone's social post, and the gentleman went through a perfect raise of the bow, a perfect draw, the shoulder was set great, but I recognized from the video he was never looking down at his feet at all, never looked at his front hand position until it was already up in the air and at full draw. Remember, this is a specific order, and if at any time you go through this process without doing it in the correct order, it's important that you learn to cancel that shot. Canceling your shot can be the best shot that you make on a target range or as a bow hunter. If something's not right, then you have to be able to identify it and change it. Because what's important is if you go through the entire process and you're aiming at a target and all of a sudden, right as you're on the trigger and the shot's about to break, you realize this front shoulder is incorrect. It's not good to try to reset that shoulder while you have all the dynamic force of the bow on you. Same is true with the grip. With a compound bow, as you draw it back, it gets easier at full draw to hold it, which also means that any torque that you have in the grip is magnified. So if you go through your whole shot process, you're at full draw, you're aiming at the target, and all of a sudden you realize that your hand's wrong, if you reposition your hand at full draw, you're going to apply a lot of torque on that system, and you're probably still going to miss. The better thing to do is to say to yourself, it doesn't feel right, cancel the shot. Now this week, the topic is going to be anchor position, and it's important that we focus on this now after we've learned our posture and learned the front shoulder position, because like I said, many of you out there are probably starting to recognize that things feel a little bit different back here on the anchor position now that we've straightened up that front end. So some of you may find that you're maybe having to bend in a little bit, or you're having to maybe go forward to the string a little bit. So we're going to make those adjustments this week. One of the things I want you to think about when it comes to anchor position is that it's critical that after you draw and the bow stops, that you find this anchor position first before you try to look through the peep. This is absolutely critical. And if you find this position or readjust this position during this week to where I'm trying to tell you where it should be, and your peep isn't right, then you may have to make slight adjustments to that peep site. But don't make adjustments to the anchor position. I'm going to talk with you about the anchor position and why it's so important to be in a specific location on the face. Now, the first thing I want to do is I want to talk about a wrist strap release, or a caliper style release, or an index finger style release, depending on what you want to call it. I know that there's a lot of you out there that still shoot this, and I understand that. One thing I want to stress is when you anchor correctly, even with a wrist strap release, then your peep height should be extremely close to anchoring properly with a handheld release. What's important about this is when you anchor, what's really something you need to understand is where that arrow is sitting on your face, because where the arrow is on your face will immediately start to identify potential problems that could arise and potential problems that are going to cause inaccuracy down the road. So to show you this, I'm going to use one of the right releases, and imagine this green line being the arrow shaft, because essentially the arrow is going to be directly in front of the hook of your release. So you can see that where you anchor starts to change where the arrow is on your face. What I look for is I want the arrow to be in what I refer to as the safe zone of the face. And the safe zone is the natural cradle between the lips and your chin bone. That spot right there allows the arrow nock to pass past your face without contacting. Now, if you anchor in a position where that arrow is, for example, low on the chin, for some people that try to lock their thumb behind their neck like this, you can see that this arrow is right on your chin. So any change in your head will change pressure on the back of the arrow, which is going to change direction on where that arrow impacts downrange. Now, if that arrow was a slightly higher on the face and more in the safe zone of the face, then in that position, you have the ability to have slight inaccuracy in your head position and still not contact or put rear pressure on the arrow. This is absolutely important. So what I teach for people who are using a wrist strap release is to set the wrist strap release to where when it's on and you curl your index finger around the trigger, that it's sitting right at the end of your index finger as it's bent, okay? I like people to be able to bend their finger around the trigger and not have the trigger out on the tip of the release. If you have your index finger on the tip of that trigger, then you're going to be way more likely to anticipate that or want to punch that trigger or make that shot happen. The tip of the index finger is highly sensitive, arguably one of the most sensitive parts of your hands, and it really understands pressure. So it knows when that shot is going to be about ready to go off or is going to go off. And a lot of times if there's impatience, it will make it go off. So I like to take that sensitivity away from my index finger by bending my index finger around the trigger and setting that trigger in a more calloused part of my index finger, which is tucked back in the first knuckle, okay? So what I want you to do is set your release to where the length is going to be in that position. Some of the people I've seen shoot over these past few weeks on social media, your release is very long, so that's going to cause a few things. One, your hand's going to have to be very extended to try to reach that trigger, and then you're starting to realize that you're very overextended in the back end because of that long neck on the release. The string fits you great on the face, but your anchor itself is in a poor position. You always want to make sure your bow is fitting you properly. So keep your head straight. Imagine there's a string in the top of your hat and pivot your head towards the target. You're allowed to pivot just like this. Imagine someone holding that little ball at the top of your hat, and you can turn it on that. But I don't want you going forward to it or coming back to it. I want you just to imagine your head being on a swivel or being on a pivot. I don't want it going forward or back. I want you to go through the same motions, drawing until the bow stops, and bringing that release hand to the anchor position that we're going to get into now. So with the wrist strap release, when your hand is wrapped around the neck or the strap of the release leading to the head, I want you to draw back and immediately bring your index knuckle to the base of your earlobe. So if you go through this motion, base of the earlobe, the head is straight, you'll notice that the string is right in the safe zone of my face. It's right in the cradle. And from there, I'm able to wrap my finger around that trigger, and I can relax the other fingers and have just slight pressure on the index finger and the trigger. And then I'm going to just focus on pulling that elbow to the wall behind me and letting that pulling motion build pressure on the trigger rather than my finger moving on the trigger, and it's going to go off with a surprise release just like that. So in this position, you're going to find that, again, the arrow is in the safe zone of the face, but also the peep height is going to be accurate once you set it to where your head is vertical. Now, if you do this, you're going to be able to use the same peep height with a wrist strap release or a handheld release. Now, with a handheld release, we're going to have to go through a few things that are important, which I've covered on several other videos. But with the handheld release, you need to realize that when you grab one of the handheld releases, in this case it's a Nock on Silverback, you have the ability to put this release in several places of your hand, and your hand can easily change your draw length. I can make my draw length longer. I can make my draw length shorter. We don't want that. We want the draw length to be consistent, which is why I teach people to wrap their fingers and load the release down that first row of knuckles. So you're going to curl your fingers around, and that is where the release is going to be. And the hand is going to be flat in that position. You'll also know as you do this, you're going to have a separation between your index finger and your middle finger because of the release itself. Now that separation between these two fingers is perfect to put the jaw right between that gap. So my index finger is just underneath the edge of my jaw. The middle finger is right above the edge of my jaw. And I'm focusing on pulling this V along the jawline. And that's what I really think about as I'm going through my shot. I'm focusing on the tip of my elbow pulling more so than the hand pulling, but I am recognizing that this trough is sliding along that jawline as the shot executes. So what you need to focus on this week is going through all those motions, drawing back the bow in line with your anchor position. Don't get in the habit of drawing your release hand down like this and then having to come up. Don't try to draw it really high like this and then come down. I really like to just focus on putting both of my hands at the target and drawing that release hand directly in the same path as where I want it to be at full draw. I'm keeping it to the side of my face just in case there's a misfire or a loop that breaks. It'll break and it'll come here. If you're bringing your head out and into the path and you ever have a loop break, you're going to clock yourself. If you happen to be pulling directly in line with your face like this, and for example on a hinge release, if you rock it the wrong way and you misfire, you're going to clock yourself. You have to learn control, just like what we talked about this week, raising that bow and drawing the release hand back to the face. Efficiency-wise, I raise this up and I'm drawing the release hand back towards the face, but I'm just on the outside of my face, and when the bow stops, I bring this anchor position over to my face instead of drawing and trying to bring my face over to the anchor position. Now with the knock to it, essentially the same thing. I'm going to draw back, the bow stops. I'm immediately going to get my index finger under the jawline or at the bottom edge of the jawline, and the middle finger is going to be right above. And you can see that in this position, the arrow is in the same exact place as it was with the index finger release. So for this week, your focus is anchor. I want you to think about drawing that bow till it stops, being efficient in the draw height. When it stops, bring the hand over to the face. This is going to be important as well for leverage or position of the rear elbow, and we'll get into this in later weeks. But draw that bow back, bow stops, bring the release hand over to the face, find your peep sight, and go ahead and continue to execute your shot just the same as you've done in past weeks. So to recap, we're dropping arrow count. We're going to go down one arrow less than last week. So we're going to shoot 3 arrow ends for 10 ends, and you're going to focus specifically on drawing, the bow stopping, finding that anchor position, leaving your head vertical and erect, and then go ahead and go through your other parts of your shot process as you always have.